Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, Stories and Sleepy Souls. Well, today I have some scary black screen stories to help you fall asleep peacefully. I'm damn sure that before the end of these stories, you're gonna fall asleep. So, like this video and subscribe the channel. And did you like my stories? Did you like my voice? Tell me in the comments. So, are you ready? Turn the lights off, close your eyes and start listening to me. Last year, Mike, a young man in his early 30s, decided to do some late-night Christmas shopping. Mike was an unassuming guy, quiet, friendly, and always thoughtful with his gifts. He'd already bought a few things for his family and friends, but still had a couple more stops to make, including picking out something special for his fiancée. After leaving work a bit early, Mike headed to a nearby shopping plaza. The air was crisp, and the parking lot was sparsely filled. He browsed a few stores, picking up items and crossing things off his list. Finally, he headed back to his car, parked under a flickering street lamp in the middle of the lot. As he unlocked his car, he glanced up and noticed a beat-up black sedan parked a few rows over. The driver's window was rolled down just enough to reveal a shadowy figure inside. The person was staring straight at him, their face obscured. Mike felt a jolt of unease, but brushed it off. Probably just someone waiting for a friend or a rideshare passenger. Shaking the thought, Mike drove off to his next stop, Target, a couple of miles away. He spent about half an hour in the store, finding what he needed. As he walked back to his car, his heart skipped a beat. The same black sedan was parked just a few spaces away. The driver was there again, and this time, Mike could see him more clearly. A man with pale, almost sickly skin, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, sat behind the wheel, his head slightly tilted as he watched. Mike's throat tightened. It didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. He hurried to his car, locked the doors, and pulled out of the parking lot. As he drove, he kept glancing in his mirrors. The black sedan didn't follow, and he let out a shaky breath, convincing himself it was all in his head. His final stop was a small grocery store near his apartment. Mike parked near the entrance, under a bright security light. He figured he'd grab his items quickly and head home. The store was quiet, and he moved fast, gathering what he needed. When he exited the store, his stomach sank. The black sedan was there again, parked farther back, partially hidden behind an SUV. Mike's skin prickled as he saw the same man inside, watching him from the shadows. This time, Mike didn't hesitate. He got into his car, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot. As he reached the street, he checked his rearview mirror. The sedan hadn't moved. Relieved, he sped home. When he pulled into his driveway and got out of the car, Mike paused. The quiet of the night was unnerving. He glanced around but saw no sign of the sedan. Finally, he went inside and locked the door. An hour later, as he was wrapping presents, Mike's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice place you've got here." His blood ran cold. Before he could react, his motion sensor light outside flicked on. Grabbing a kitchen knife, Mike approached the front window and peeked through the curtains. His heart nearly stopped. The black sedan was parked across the street, its headlights off. The man was standing on the sidewalk staring at the house. His hood was down now, and Mike could see his face, gaunt, expressionless, with hollow eyes that seemed almost inhuman. Mike called the police, but by the time they arrived, the man and his car were gone. The officers reassured him it was probably a prank, But Mike couldn't shake the feeling that it was far more sinister. That night, as Mike tried to sleep, he was jolted awake by the sound of faint tapping on his bedroom window. His apartment was on the second floor. Gathering his courage, he walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. His breath caught in his throat. Etched into the frost on the glass were 3 words: "I found you." Mike never saw the man again, but he moved shortly after. To this day, every December, Mike finds himself looking over his shoulder, haunted by the memory of hollow eyes staring back at him. It started with footsteps, soft at first, almost blending with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But they weren't mine. Night jogging had always been my escape, a quiet reprieve from the chaos of the day. The dim glow of the street lights, the rhythmic tap of my sneakers against the pavement, the cool night air. It all felt soothing. A year into this routine, I knew the streets around my neighborhood like the back of my hand. But that night, something pulled me away from my usual route. The air felt heavier as I turned onto an unfamiliar street, one where the street lights barely worked, casting long, flickering shadows. The houses were old and lifeless, their windows dark and uninviting. I should have turned back, but there was something oddly compelling about the silence. The first sign of unease came when I noticed a man walking ahead of me on the opposite side of the street. He moved slowly, almost deliberately. I thought nothing of it at first, just another night owl like me. But then, as I rounded a corner, I glanced back. He was on my side of the street now. He wasn't walking anymore. He was jogging, matching my pace perfectly. A chill ran down my spine. My mind raced for logical explanations. Maybe he was just exercising too? But every time I sped up, so did he. When I slowed down, his footsteps fell into sync with mine. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light, only his silhouette, shrouded in dark clothing. The air grew colder, almost suffocating. The only sound was the steady thud of my sneakers and his shadowy presence just out of reach. I turned onto another street, trying to shake him, but he stayed with me, always just far enough to keep me guessing. I started to feel like a rat in a maze, being guided by something unseen. Every corner I turned, every attempt to lose him, only seemed to bring him closer. When I glanced back again, I noticed something that made my heart lurch. He wasn't running under the streetlights anymore. He was moving in the shadows. Whatever he was, he didn't want to be seen. My breath quickened, my legs burned, but I didn't dare stop. I veered toward a more populated area, my last hope to find safety. Up ahead, I saw the warm glow of a bar and the faint sounds of laughter spilling onto the street. Relief washed over me. But as I approached the lighted area, I dared one last look behind me. He had stopped at the edge of the shadows, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. His figure was still, unnaturally so, as if he was waiting, watching. And then I saw it. His head tilted slightly, and for a brief moment, the flickering streetlight illuminated his face. Or rather, what should have been a face. There was nothing, just a void where features should have been, like a hollow mask staring back at me. I sprinted the last stretch, nearly collapsing into the small crowd outside the bar. I turned back, my chest heaving, but he was gone. I stayed at the bar longer than I needed to, convincing myself that I had imagined it all. But when I finally jogged home, sticking to the brightest streets I could find, the feeling of being watched never left me. I don't jog at night anymore. And when I walk past that unfamiliar street in the daytime, I swear I feel the shadows watching, waiting for me to step back into their embrace. It was the smell that first caught my attention. Sharp, acrid, and unmistakably out of place in the cool night air. But by then, I'd already made the mistake of stopping. My name's Adrian. I'm not much of a jogger, but that night I needed to clear my head. The empty streets and distant hum of crickets seemed like the perfect backdrop to drown out my thoughts. I stuck to the familiar routes, places I knew well, but something about that night, it was different. I found myself wandering toward a street I rarely visited. It wasn't far from my usual paths, but it had always felt off. The houses here were older, their facades faded and forgotten. At the center of it all was that house. It stood like a scar on the block, its overgrown yard creeping into the sidewalk. The paint, once white, had turned a sickly gray, peeling like dead skin. Its windows were boarded up, its doors sealed tight. Everyone in the neighborhood had a story about the place, but the one thing they all agreed on was this: you stayed away from it. My mom once told me someone had died inside, a death so violent, so tragic, that the house couldn't shake the shadow of it. No one wanted to live there, and so it was left to rot. That night, as I jogged past, I froze. The front door, which had always been firmly boarded shut, was ajar. The boards hung loose, as if pried off by force. But that wasn't what stopped me. Inside, a faint, flickering light danced in the darkness. It wasn't the kind of light you'd expect from kids sneaking in with flashlights. It moved too erratically, like the flame of a candle being carried through the air. And then I saw it, a shadow. Not just one, but several, moving across the gaps in the boards. I should have walked away, but something pulled me closer. The air felt heavier as I approached, the faint smell of cigar smoke mingling with the mustiness of decay. Peering through the gap in the door, I saw them, figures moving in the dim glow of candlelight. At least 4 of them, their forms distorted by the flickering light. At the center of the room sat a man in an old wooden chair, his silhouette outlined by the glow of several candles. He was gesturing wildly, speaking in hushed tones. The others stood around him, their movements deliberate, as if they were performing some kind of ritual. I strained to hear their words, but they were muffled, like whispers caught in a storm. A chill ran down my spine when I realized they weren't using flashlights or modern tools. Who carries candles in the age of cell phones, and why? My curiosity was quickly replaced by dread. As I leaned in closer, the creak of rotting wood betrayed me. One of the boards I was resting on snapped, sending a sharp crack echoing into the night. Every movement inside the house stopped. The man in the chair turned his head toward the door, his movements eerily slow, deliberate. And then, the candles went out. The house was plunged into darkness. Panic gripped me as I backed away, stumbling over the uneven sidewalk. The faint sound of footsteps emerged from within, deliberate and unhurried. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I reached my own street. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding in my ears. For hours I sat by the window, peering out into the dark, expecting to see someone or something emerge from the shadows. The next morning, I drove past the house on my way to work. The door was closed. The boards were back in place, secured as if they had never been touched. I've jogged past that house a few times since then, each time slowing to a near stop, scanning for any sign of life. But it's been silent, too silent. And yet, every time I pass, I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is watching me from the other side of those rotting walls.